temporarily set aside the pending amendment so that I may call up my amendment 2707 with the modification which is at the desk.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from Pennsylvania, Mr. Toomey, proposes amendment number 2707 as modified.
Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia. Senator Manchin, first of all, what was your impression overall?
Well, there's a lot of encouraging points and encouraging message there. And there's some things that are still challenging, very challenging to me in the state of West Virginia on energy. And it looks like still the war on fossil or coal, if you will. And we've got to get together where we're a nation that basically embraces everything we have, to have the balance between the economy and the environment, to make sure we can produce energy this country depends on, and not rely on foreign oil or foreign energy whatsoever. So that was concerning. But the incentives about, we're going to reward people with tax incentives if you can create a job. And it's all about jobs, you know, and I think those incentives and tax reforms that really create jobs is what we need to look at. So I was encouraged. Maybe we're looking at something in corporate tax reform that could be very productive, hopefully. And I thought some of the tone that was used could have been a little bit differently. I was an executive. I was the governor of the state, and I knew the powers at the office. I knew the Constitution of the state of West Virginia. I knew that I was responsible for day-to-day operations to run it effectively and as efficiently as I could, and I would use all the powers the office had and the Constitution gave me. But I would not make it sound as if I was going to go beyond the powers or do it my way without you. That could have been that tone could have been a little bit conciliatory.
Just to quote the president, you touched on this a minute ago, but climate change is a fact. What does that say to West Virginia?
No, climate change is a fact. Oh, 7 billion people. We don't deny that. Not at all. But what we have been able to produce for this country for 100 more years, we've given the country the life it has. We've made it the superpower it is right today. We've given people, we've brought them out of disparity into prosperity. It's been the energy that's been produced. We mine the coal that makes the steel, that built the factories and defends the country. So we've done all of that. We should get a little bit of credit. And the Department of Energy says they're going to be using coal for the next 30 years. They need it to produce most of the energy this country is going to be consuming. And on the other hand, the President mentioned that we've cut emissions and we've cleaned up the environment more in the United States in the last 2 decades than ever in the history of the world. So we're doing everything humanly possible to comply. We just need a little willing partner, a helping hand every now and then. And if we're doing that and we're only using 1/8 of the fossil that's burning the world, the other 7/8 are used in different parts of the world, why don't we use our technology that we've developed in West Virginia and other parts of this country and take them out and try to clean up the rest of the environment?
Speaking of the environment, it was the Elk River near Charleston.
Yeah,
what's the current status of that,
well,
sir? And has the EPA and the Interior Department been helpful?
Everybody's been extremely helpful. The President declared an emergency. We got all the help we needed, the water coming in and all that. It was a horrific situation. It could happen anywhere in the United States of America. It was a non-hazmat material, but by being a non-hazmat material, it wasn't looked at as on being hazardous. And you can see it. Thank God we've had no deaths attributed to this horrific tragedy. But again, it's been a disruption of lives and the uncomfortable situation we put people in, and the loss of the economy and the jobs and the work that was lost because of the shutdown. And now the uncertainty that people have whether they can trust that part again. Our goal in West Virginia, and especially in that valley right now, is to have the cleanest water and be tested the cleanest water in America. You have to come back better and bigger and stronger. But we're going to have legislation come out of the federal government, working with Barbara Boxer, working with Republicans all across the board. It's going to give all the states a wake-up call to say, listen, look at what you have on your waterways. Look at the non-hazmat stuff that you haven't really been looking at, and go and see what's there.
And finally, the President said that he would act regulatorily on gun legislation with or without Congress.
Again, you know, I think he could have chose his words a lot better. When I was the governor and executive, I had responsibility to do everything that the powers I had within the office of governor to run this government as efficiently and as effectively as I possibly could. But to make it sound like I'm going to go outside the boundaries of the Constitution and do what I think's best without the approval of the legislature or without the approval of Congress rubs people wrong. It's just not who we are as a people. So maybe it just choice of words could have been much better. I know that as a former governor and a staunch defender of the Constitution, I said, listen, you can't regulate what's not been legislated outside the powers that you were given. You just can't do it.
Joe Manchin, Senator, Democrat, West Virginia.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
This is C-SPAN's live coverage from Statuary Hall following the President's 1-hour, 20-page State of the Union address. This was his 5th State of the Union address. Representative Steve Scalise, a Republican of Louisiana and GOP Study Committee Chair. Was there anything in there that you agreed with the President?
Well, you know, the President talks about an all-of-the-above energy strategy, something I've agreed with for a long time. Unfortunately, his actions on energy haven't met that promise, and that's something that we, of course, in South Louisiana appreciate with the drilling that we'd like to do more of off our coast. Unfortunately, a lot of the federal policies that the President's pushed have closed off more areas of the Outer Continental Shelf and the Gulf of Mexico. They've closed off a lot of federal lands all around the country. The President's using the EPA to threaten to go after the hydraulic fracturing revolution that's created all this great new economic opportunity for natural gas, which actually helps lower gas prices. So, you know, a lot of the things that the President talks about on energy, he just hadn't followed up. I mean, he literally has had a war on the coal industry, shut that industry down virtually, and actually increased the cost of energy. When you look at all the freezing temperatures we're seeing across our country, the President talks about global warming. We had snow in New Orleans today, so, you know, there's a lot of irony in that too, but, you know, I wish his actions would meet a lot of the words that he promises.
As a member of the Republican Study Committee, or chair of the Republican Study Committee, considered conservative, did he talk about the deficit?
No, in fact, the president laid out a lot of new spending ideas. If you listen to a lot of his speech, it was a lot of new government spending, no real plan for where the money would come from, no real plan for where the priorities are. In a way, he criticized those of us who actually try to push to control spending, to force Washington to live with its own means, like every family does. And a lot of his policies have increased our debt in exponential ways, in ways that no other president has done. So if you look at the threat of out-of-control spending in Washington, it's never been greater, and the challenges that it poses, and it really poses the big threat to our young children. I mean, young people that are graduating from college now, the president talked about their student loan debt. The problem most of those young people have today that are graduating from college is they can't get a job in this Obama economy because of the policies of this president. So if he really wanted to talk about something that I think would resonate with people, he should have talked about ways he can work with Republicans to create jobs. He talked a lot about using his pen. And he doesn't need Congress. He'll just make up laws on his own. I mean, the president can't write laws with a pen. That's why you have an executive branch and a legislative branch, to be a check and a balance. What the president could do with a pen right now is to sign the Keystone Pipeline, and he'd create 25,000 jobs today. And yet he doesn't want to do that. So spend a lot of time talking about things that he doesn't have the authority to do. I wish he'd talk more about the things he does have the authority to do.
I think I saw a fellow Louisianian of yours running around here, not a member of Congress, but Willie Robertson, I think.
Yeah, Willie Robinson, Duck Dynasty fame from West Monroe, Louisiana. I actually got to visit with him earlier tonight, and somebody we're proud of in our state, somebody who really represents the kind of values that I think make this country great, and he comes under attack for it. Yet he's proud of it. They pray at the end of every episode of Duck Dynasty. That's something that they insisted upon, and those are the kind of values that they share, and millions of other people do too. And I think a lot of people feel those kind of values are under attack.
Steve Scalise, Republican of Louisiana, Chair of the Republican Study Committee. We appreciate your time here in Statuary Hall. And the last time we talked to our next guest, we were talking about a book.
Yes, we were.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz is a congresswoman. She's chair of the DNC, and she's an author.
I am. And a mother.
And a mother and a wife, yes, and a daughter, with a mother who works at Macy's. Know way too much about you, I think.
Wow.
So, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, from a DNC perspective, what the president did, is it tough? Is it an easy sell for you to raise money on what he had to say, or is it tough to get donors?
Well, first and foremost, I was here tonight as a member of the United States House of Representatives representing my constituents in South Florida, and as their representative, I was very proud of the president's speech tonight. Proud because he both outstretched his hand, made it clear to the Republicans that he continues to be willing and wants to work with them to find common ground, not do it all his way, not do it all their way, but we've got a lot of challenges that we need to continue to move forward and work on together. But that if they continue to throw obstacles in his way, to be intransigent, and to do things like shutting the government down and bring us to the brink of economic disaster, refusing to pay our nation's bills, that he would take the action that he needs to move our country forward. And that is good policy and good politics. So it's helpful both for me as a member of Congress, who represents constituents in South Florida, and also as the chair of the DNC.
An issue that you've been in the press about recently is Iran, and the president essentially said he's ready to negotiate with Iran. What's your thought on that?
Amendment 2709, and that the amendment be modified to correct a typographical error.
Without objection. Clerk will report.
The senator from Oregon, Mr. Merkley, proposes amendment number 2709 as modified.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I'll take this occasion to just make a couple of remarks about the content of this amendment. This amendment is about a predatory practice that is involved in the flood insurance world. And that predatory practice is that when a servicer of mortgages places insurance, flood insurance, on a property, be it a home or be it a business, they sometimes to arrange a very expensive policy to be placed on the property. And the reason they do this is that the insurer, the insurance company that has prepared the policy, is charging many times the market rate, but in exchange, they pay the servicer a large bonus. Now, we can remember how bonuses in the subprime world were used to steer families from prime mortgages into subprime mortgages. In this case, the bonus is being paid to the servicer, so the servicer will steer the family into an expensive insurance policy rather than a fair market rate policy. Now, my amendment just takes a very simple approach and says that these bonus payments or incentive payments, or whatever name you would like to give to them, from the insurer to the servicer in order to utilize their very expensive above-market rate product rather than a fair market rate product will not be allowed. That eliminates this conflict of interest, would enable the servicer to provide a fair service of placing insurance on a property, flood insurance on a property, if it's required under the terms of the mortgage, but not to do so in a predatory manner. So, Mr. President, I hope that all of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle will take a look at this practice and realize that the overall scope of this bill is about a fair deal for families who are in the situation of being required under their mortgage to obtain flood insurance. Part of that fair deal should involve ending this particular predatory premium practice on forced-place flood insurance. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Story, 40% savings. Steny Hoyer is the minority whip, the Democratic whip for the House of Representatives. Mr. Hoyer.
Hi.
The President said 3 times he may act without the Congress.
I think what the President said, we want to work together. But if you don't work, I'm not going to be immobilized. I'm not going to forget that I've been elected by all the people to do things. And I'm going to do things. I'm going to do things that try to create jobs, grow our economy, invest in the education of our kids and the job training of our workers. I'm going to do things. And I think that's what the American people expect all of us to do. And his message was, let's do it together. Let's work together to make America better. And I think that's a message the American public are going to respond to and say, yes, that's what I want to do. And they also don't want, if the Congress won't help, if the Congress won't participate, for the President to just sit there while the country does not make the progress that the people know it needs.
Where do you see common ground between the Democrats and the Republicans in the House?
Well, I think there's common ground in that everybody says they want to grow the economy. For instance, the President said he wanted to see taxes reduced on businesses that were doing and growing jobs here in America, and didn't want to advantage those who were taking jobs overseas, and wanted to make sure that people could bring profits home. So from that standpoint, I think we can reach common ground there. I think we ought to be able to reach common ground on comprehensive immigration reform. 70% of the American people thinks that makes sense. The Chamber of Commerce thinks it makes sense. AFL-CIO thinks it makes sense. Farm owners think it makes sense. Farm workers think it makes sense. Evangelicals think it makes sense. Certainly, the Congress of the United States ought to agree with the overwhelming majority of the American people and interest groups on each side that it makes sense to do. It grows jobs, grows our economy, and it's the right thing to do from a moral standpoint in any event. So I would hope we could reach common ground, and frankly, Speaker Boehner is taking steps to address immigration. Majority Leader Cantor says the immigration system is broken. So we certainly have a consensus that it needs change. Certainly we ought to be able to reach consensus on how to do that.
You've been around here for a while. You've heard a lot of these State of the Union addresses. This is the 5th from this president. Just give us a kind of a running commentary on the State of the Union addresses you've heard.
Well, I think most of the addresses I've heard I thought were pretty good. The President spent a lot, Republican and Democrat. I've been here, as you know, since Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan, George Bush the first, as I call him, Bill Clinton, George Bush the second, now Barack Obama. I think most of the speeches I've heard them give in a State of the Union are good. It's interesting that, unfortunately, the parties sort of line up, and if you're a Democrat and it's a Democrat president, that's a good speech. If you're a Republican and it's a Democratic president, that's not so hot. And Democrats sort of do the same thing with Republican presidents. That's not the key. The key is, how does the public respond? We are, after all, representatives of that public. He's really speaking to them. He's speaking to America. He's speaking to their aspirations and their hopes, and yes, their concerns. And then they will reflect that. If we're listening, as representatives have a responsibility to do to their people, if they respond to the President's vision and agenda, then that ought to be reflected in the Congress of the United States. Not perfectly, not absolutely, but that's what presidents are really trying to do with their speeches. Not so much appeal to the members. They deal with the members every day. But they want to look the American public in the eye and say, this is where we've come, this is what we need to do, and this is what I want to do working with the Congress and with all of you.
Steny Hoyer, Democratic Whip in the House of Representatives.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you, Peter.
You're watching C-SPAN 2, live coverage following the State of the Union of Statuary Hall, where members of Congress and the media hang out. This served as chamber of the House of Representatives for 50 years. By the way, the first time that a State of the Union address was delivered over the radio was 1923, Calvin Coolidge. First time it was ever on TV, 1947. And the last president not to deliver a State of the Union address was Jimmy Carter. In 1981, he delivered a written message. Joining us, Bill Huizenga, Michigan, Republican. Give us your assessment of the president's speech.
Yeah, I guess I need to disagree with the minority leader a bit, where he was saying when he heard the president say he was going to go around Congress, he felt that that was, well, I want to work with Congress. I take him at his word. He's ready to go around Congress for those big things that he wants to get done. I think that's a huge mistake. Frankly, most of the speech was a lot of stuff that we've heard before. I want to close Guantanamo. I want gun control. I want different things that may have been discussed previously. I'm in my second term, so this is now my third or fourth time that I've heard a lot of that. But any of the really big stuff, it sounded like he was just prepared to go it alone. And I think that's a huge, huge mistake.
Are you in Gerald Ford's old congressional seat?
I do have part of Jerry Ford's old congressional district, yes. In fact, I'm reading a book right now, Write It While I'm Gone, Write It When I'm Gone, which is sort of his off-the-record discussions. And it's interesting. I love history, and it's interesting hearing sort of, again, reading his perspective and what it was like and sort of his responsibilities of how he handled the presidency and how he served as minority leader for the Republicans in a very tumultuous time during Watergate. And compare and contrast that right now. It's an interesting comparison.
Congressman Huizenga, when you think about Michigan and what the president had to say, was there any areas of agreement in there?
Yeah, I think, well, certainly the ending. Talking about Sergeant Rumsberger, I'm the son of a disabled World War II veteran, and I think when this nation can come together and support, especially our wounded warriors, but support our troops that are coming back from combat like that, that is very unifying, and that's very positive. Again, some of those smaller things, talking about what might happen with my IRA, the retirement program. We got to see some of those details. I thought up until the very end with the sergeant there, the largest applause line, the most unifying applause line was America going to the Olympics and getting gold. I mean, that's a pretty low bar then if that's going to be our level of success. So I hope this president will work together. In fact, I just had 2 weeks ago a bill pass unanimously out of the House. I serve on financial services. It had to do with mergers and acquisitions, and it's hard work. I mean, it's hard work reaching consensus, but when you are doing some things that make sense, that streamline the effectiveness of government when it comes to job creation here in the United States, I think we can get consensus. Unfortunately, the president hasn't worked towards that oftentimes. He's talked about it, but hasn't worked towards that many times.
What were you doing prior to coming to Congress?
I had done a couple of things. I was a state legislator. I had been the district director for Congressman Pete Hoekstra, my predecessor, but also a background in real estate and construction. I own a small sand and gravel operation, and so a foot in two worlds, the public policy as well as the private sector.
Bill Huizenga, spending a few minutes with us here on C-SPAN. We're about to talk to a fellow Michigander, Sander Levin.
After I asked for unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
I want to speak very briefly on the Toomey Amendment. I know that we have on the floor a bill that basically, let's face it, puts off for about 4 years reforms that we put into the flood insurance program. It's a $24 billion program. A very small, in essence, entitlement program that we have in this country. And I am very despondent over the fact that we passed these reforms out of the Banking Committee unanimously in 2011. They took place on October of 2013. Our nation is facing incredible entitlement problems, and we all know it. People on both sides of the aisle have been down here ad nauseum talking about the fact that as a nation, the number one threat that we have is our inability to deal with the fiscal issues that we know we have throughout the entitlement programs we have in this country. And here we have a situation where unanimously out of the Banking Committee, we passed reforms to deal with the flood insurance program that we know is moving quickly towards insolvency. And so what do? Maybe instead of being the most deliberative body in the world, we might be described as the most pandering body in society in the world. What we're doing instead is punting on these reforms. And I'm discouraged by that. It's amazing. I just think that, you know, we have not shown the ability to really address any of the bigger issues that our nation has to deal with. So, you know, I would be obviously more responsive to a bill that maybe made tweaks or did some things to make this work in a way that was not quite as draconian. But the fact is, we all know that the way the program works, it's just not sustainable, and we know that, in essence, taxpayers all across this country are subsidizing folks that are participating in a national program to cause them to have insurance relative to their own property. So, in essence, in an effort to try to deal with this in a more thoughtful way, Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania has offered an amendment to calls to ensure that the increases in premiums that people are facing are done so in a way that obviously dramatically reduces the impact on people. And again, I applaud that. I appreciate that. I do think that there are some homeowners in this country and property owners that are having the way the program now works, these increases would take place over the next 4 to 5 years, and instead the Toomey Amendment causes that to not increase, especially for those who make under a certain amount of money. For those not to increase more than 25% a year. So if you had a $200 bill for flood insurance, next year it would go up 50%. I think it's a thoughtful effort to try to cause this bill to still be actuarially sound. It has no negative impact on our deficits, and I think it's a way for us to deal with this in a much, much better way than, let's face it, just putting our head in the sand and not taking this issue on. I want to go back one more time and say this is one of the few reforms, it may be the only reform that I'm aware of that has actually become law that has come out of the Banking Committee in several years. It did so unanimously. This is, in essence, an entitlement program. It is a small entitlement program, and I understand it's very, very important to some property owners around our country. But if we as a body are going to turn away from reforms and not, by the way, replace those reforms with other reforms, but instead delay for, in essence, what most people believe because of the way FEMA operates, delay this for 4 years, I think it speaks to a body that just really has no desire whatsoever to take on the issues that are so important to our nation's citizens. So I do want to say that, again, I think the Toomey Amendment is a thoughtful approach to trying to deal with the issue that I think is affecting many people in this body who do have people that they represent that are going through substantial increases in a way that they feel to be too draconian. So if that's your issue, I would urge people to strongly support the Toomey Amendment. And, by the way, with the Toomey Amendment's passage, which leaves the rest of the reforms in place, I would then believe that we've done something in this body that is thoughtful. We've attempted to make this flood insurance program actuarially sound, and at the same time, we would have solved the issue that I think so many people here are concerned about. Without the passage of the Toomey Amendment as a part of this bill, I do want to say one more time, this body will have failed once again with a very, very, very small entitlement program. We will have failed to rise to the occasion to put our country minimally on a course towards solvency, and instead turned away from this effort, which speaks to the fact that there's almost no likelihood that we'll ever, within the short period, midterm anyway, be able to address the bigger issues that we all know are looming and are affecting our country in such big ways. So I yield the floor. I urge strong support for the Toomey Amendment. And without the Toomey Amendment, I hope this body will vote down this bill, which undoes the only real reforms that the Banking Committee has put in place in the last several years. And with that, I yield the floor and thank the President for the time.
Mr. President.
Senator from New York.
Thank you. And first, I thank my colleague and friend from Tennessee for his as usual, thoughtful presentation. Even though I disagree with it, it's always thoughtful, carefully thought out, and appreciate his thoughts and efforts. Now, first, Mr. President, the need to pass the Menendez-Isaacson-Landrieu bill is extremely important. Here in New York, we're not here, I wish I were, in New York, we have seen the follies of the present flood insurance law. We've seen follies in a variety of ways. Most of all, we have seen homeowners charged a fortune, which they can't afford. We have seen homeowners told even if they're not going to be charged, immediately when they sell their home, the rate will go up so high that they can't sell their home or the value of the home decreases. We have seen people, victims of Sandy, whose homes were destroyed or largely hurt, rebuild their homes, and then be forced maybe to lose them because of ridiculous flood insurance claims. We have seen the problems with the maps. areas 5 miles from the nearest flood somehow get called a flood zone and have to pay more insurance. We have even seen the FEMA overreaching in terms of drawing maps. In fact, in my state, they used Suffolk County's flood maps and flood levels and just transposed them on Nassau County, a different place and with different elevations and different tides, and we had to get that undone. So a moratorium, going back to the drawing boards and holding rates in place while that happens, makes eminent sense. It is true. It will cost the government some money. But what's our job here? Is it to let thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands default, lose their homes, while we stand there and twiddle our thumbs? I don't think so. I don't think the vast majority of Americans think that. We have to figure out how to deal with flood insurance. And the Menendez-Isaacson-Landrieu bill does that. But while we're doing it, we have to make sure that people don't lose their homes. There's many more storms out there. We know that. We've had a Katrina. We've had a Sandy, creating unprecedented damage. It certainly means that the old flood insurance program probably has to be changed. But to just eliminate it, basically, by not passing this bill or by passing the Toomey Amendment, which in effect would eliminate it, makes no sense and would cause huge damage. Now, I rise in opposition to the Toomey Amendment. If you believe that there should be some level of affordability before we impose rates, then you can't vote for the Toomey bill. Because the Toomey bill basically has mandatory rate increases before any affordability study is concluded. It repeats the mistake of Biggert Waters. Biggert Waters actually called for an affordability study. FEMA didn't complete the affordability study and still had the rates go into effect. If affordability is one of our hallmarks, and I believe it is, then it certainly makes no sense to do what FEMA has done under Biggert Waters, put rate increases in effect before affordability is studied, or do what Toomey does and say actually explicitly says rate increases shall go into effect before the affordability study is completed. Furthermore, the Toomey Amendment, in my judgment, means you may as well have nothing at all. Go back to the old, because it establishes an uncapped annual fee on all 5.6 million NFIP policyholders for unspecified period of time until the identified costs of this bill are offset. No guarantee that homeowners would be protected from a $30,000 premium, if that's what the actuaries think. And just speaking for my state of New York, they say, well, it's people on the water, it's second homes, it's rich people. Not in New York, it's not. You've all seen the pictures of homes damaged in Staten Island, in the Rockaway, Queens, in southern Brooklyn, on the southern shore of Long Island. Modest homes, some of them even called bungalows, where people live full-time. Long Beach, an example of that. Average folks, firefighters and teachers and cops and clerks and secretaries, small business people, who struggle. Double or triple or quadruple their insurance rates, their flood insurance rates, and they just can't get by. And one other point I'd make. Some of you say, well, this doesn't affect me. It's gonna, because FEMA's remapping across the country. They've done a lot of the remapping in New York. I've talked about how irresponsible what they've done is. Once they come to your state and map, you will see that the mapping is almost nonsensical. Mapping people into flood zones who have never had a flood, charging rates that average folks cannot afford. And from what I'm told, Pennsylvania is the state with the highest percentage of new mapping activity. 14% of all new mapping activity, 1,400 maps. So I think even in my good friend, and I know he's a true believer in these things, and I don't doubt that, and I respect his integrity, but it's sure going to affect the people of Pennsylvania. Guess which state is second in terms of new maps? New York, 625. And that's why I feel so strongly and have worked so hard with Senators Menendez and Isaacson and Landrieu, who have done such a fabulous job on this legislation to get it passed. And so I urge defeat of the Toomey Amendment. The Toomey Amendment is almost a mirror image of the bill itself, the Biggert Waters bill, which we are trying to counteract, and because FEMA didn't implement it correctly. And if Toomey is defeated, and if our flood insurance bill, which I'm a proud co-sponsor, is passed, homeowners will be able to breathe a sigh of real relief while FEMA goes back to the drawing boards and figures out a way to have a flood insurance program that doesn't bankrupt thousands of middle-class, working-class people. Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Ranking member on the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee.
Even at this late hour.
Congressman Levin, let's start on the opposite side. What did the president say that you just didn't sit well with you?
I can't think of anything. Because he covered so many critical issues, and they needed to be addressed. And I think his message was very clear. Let's put our shoulder to the wheel of collective action. But where that won't happen, I will try to do my best as president.
One of the issues I didn't hear him talk about or see in his speech, tax reform, something that the Ways and Means Committee has been talking about for the past year.
No, he did refer to it. And he talked about the need to essentially straighten out our code to make sure that people don't use loopholes, that they don't use them to shift job overseas. At the same time, we needed to make sure that we lowered corporate rates, but in a way that worked for everybody. So he did touch on tax reform.
Same question we just asked Bill Huizenga, a second-termer from Michigan, a Republican from Grand Rapids area. When you heard his speech, What did you think about when you thought about Michigan?
Amendment 2697. And I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about that. I know somebody else is coming to the floor here rather quickly, and I have about 5 minutes, I've been told by the cloakroom. Congressional creation of the National Association of Registered Agents and Brokers, the bill that has been attached to the flood bill, usurps the rights of states' authority over insurancing, licensing, and regulations. Congress established the McCarran-Ferguson Act that states should retain the regulatory authority over insurance laws. Well, NARAB 2 was crafted to retain primacy of insurance regulations and enforcement actions within the states. This bill will nevertheless compel states to accept a national license within their jurisdiction. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office stated the association's authority would exist only through a preemption of states' power to regulate the licensing of insurance producers. This preemption would stem from an exercise of the sovereign power of the federal government. NARAB 2 provides the President and his or her appointee the authority to nullify the decisions made by the NARAB board, but does not extend any of the same rights to the individual states. This amendment will my amendment will provide a state the opportunity to opt out of participation in NARAB only through the passage of legislation by the state legislature and signature of the governor, and it will not allow a state insurance commissioner to opt out on a whim. To prevent a disruptive transition, this amendment requires a 2-year delay between passage of this state legislation and the effective date of an opt-out. So you can't get out just like that. It's 2 years. In order to maintain the foundation of reciprocity and prevent states from gaming the provision for a competitive advantage, insurance producers located within a state that opts out of NARAB would be ineligible from participating in the NARAB system. So if your state opt-out, you lose the privilege of going to other states. The inclusion of this provision would accomplish the bill's goal of streamlining and cost savings without the continuation of Congress infringing on activities that should be left to the states. The amendment will still allow the benefits provided by a multi-state licensing process to reduce the bureaucracy involved for producers to access customers in other states, which will help increase competition and lower consumer costs, things that I'm totally for. Actually, I'm for this bill, but only with preserving the 10th Amendment rights of states. The provision will also provide a safeguard from NARAB if 10 years from now it's not as working as well as current consensus has hoped and a state or states no longer wish to participate. As the bill's proponents have already pointed out, NARAB has the support of every state and every insurance producer. They all agree. If that's the case, and this is so popular and such a needed reform, then no state will opt out. And the opt-out provision would be moot while still protecting the state's rights. I understand the opposition to this, that they think this won't get off the ground. But the very statements have been made both in the committee and on the floor that everybody wants this. All the insurance industry wants this. All the state insurance commissioners want this. If that's the case, nobody will opt out. And we will have met our constitutional duty of providing and protecting the Bill of Rights for the states. I just finished by saying this. One of the reasons we're in extreme difficulty, we're in what physicians would call extremis, is that we have ignored states' rights. We have ignored the Bill of Rights, and we said we're prime. We're prime. So as CBO said, we're stepping all over this. And I understand I probably won't be able to stop it, but it's another indication of why we need the Enumerated Powers Act. And that's simply a bill sponsored by 44 senators that says if you bring a bill to the floor, you have to give the authority under which the enumerated powers would justify you bringing this bill to the floor. To make us pause, just to think about it. I don't think it's unreasonable. People may disagree about whether states ought to have the right to opt out, but if the program is such as has been designed by the authors of this bill and the statements by the people who have spoken on this bill on the floor, if that's the case, putting this amendment in won't harm it at all. It won't ever be used. So it's simply saying if they want to opt out, it's 2 years after they vote in their legislature and signed by the governor before they can, so there's no disruption. Nobody's going to do that if it's true what everybody who is supporting this bill has said. So it's peculiar and curious to me why anybody would oppose this amendment if, in fact, the facts are as stated by those supporting the NAREB 2. And I support it. But I think we ought to protect the state's right, constitutional rights. And with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Jersey.
I know that the distinguished senator from North Dakota is going to speak, but if she would yield for one moment. I ask unanimous consent that the time until 4:45 p.m. be equally divided between the two leaders or their designees, that at 4:45 p.m. today the Senate proceed to votes in relation to the following: the Menendez motion to waive budget points of order against S-1926, the Reed Amendment 2703, the White House Amendment 2706, and the Gillibrand Amendment 2708. I would expect that those amendments would go by voice. And finally, there will be 2 minutes of debate in between the votes, equally divided in the usual form.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from North Dakota.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to stand and support a bill that has taken a long time to get to the floor of the United States Senate. And I remember back when members like Senator Mary Landrieu stood and sounded the alarm. He sounded the alarm even before we saw the problem coming. And as a result of that initial effort and as a result of the great effort of the gentleman who just left the floor, Senator Menendez, we now have a bill on the floor that we can truly say we're actually listening to the middle class. How many times do you think in this body we talk about the working folks who come to work every day doing everything that they can, put food on the table, and they just need us to not cause more problems for them? And we hear about the middle class, and last night during the State of the Union speech, again, more discussion about the need to pay attention to the financial struggles and the challenges of working families. Well, let me tell you, this is a bill that for so many working families in North Dakota and across the country can mean the difference between home ownership or no home ownership, mean the difference between actually having equity in their home or having a house that's underwater. And I'm not exaggerating. This is a critical part of the housing market. It has created uncertainty in the housing market while we're trying to achieve some success and some continuing momentum. Housing is 20% of what we do in this country in our economy, but yet this is throwing a monkey wrench into the housing market for so many families and for so many states. I want to not tell anything new here, maybe, but to kind of give a different perspective, because I think all too often people think flood insurance is about the coast, or it's about the Gulf, or it's about what's happening maybe along a major river, whether it's the Mississippi. But let me tell you, in my state, flooding is a reality for way too many people. And it is a problem that we have experienced during these wet cycles that has led to devastation, has led to loss of equity in folks' home, and it has led to uncertainty. And I want to talk a little bit about two places that you may not think, because you've all heard about the massive Grand Forks flood, and you, of course, watched television as we were looking at what could have potentially happened in our largest city, the city of Fargo, North Dakota. But what you may not know is that we have a city called Minot, North Dakota, who experienced a devastating flood. Absolutely devastating flood, where a tremendous amount of affordable housing, that housing that was along the bodyway, thought they were protected from a 100-year flood. Many did not have flood insurance, and the 100-year flood came and devastated and wiped out literally hundreds and hundreds of good, hard-working families and retired folks. And they're looking to rebuild. But right now, the uncertainty of flood insurance and what's going to happen with the new flood maps has slowed that effort down. It has created uncertainty. I just had a meeting in the city of Minot where I talked to the mayor, talked to the city officials, and asked the questions about whether they were seeing this uncertainty, and they certainly are getting a lot of questions. And I would love to tell those hardworking North Dakotans that we actually, in Washington, D.C., can hear what they're saying. I also want to talk about another place way off from Minot. It's down the Red River Valley. It's a place called Grafton, North Dakota, where a great North Dakota family, Allison and Kyle, purchased their home a year ago. At the time, the flood insurance rate on their home was $900 a year. They knew that when they bought the house. They said, okay, fine, we've got this extra expenditure in order to meet our mortgage requirements, and they built that into their budget. And this is coverage for $100,000. Seemed reasonable, seemed like they were paying their fair share. But when the policy recently came up after the changes in the Biggert-Waters law, their flood insurance rate skyrocketed to $4,200 a year. $4,200 a year. That's a 375% increase. In an email to me, Allison expressed her desire to raise their children in Grafton, but unfortunately they no longer can afford to live there with those rates. Because, see, in Grafton, we don't have flood protection. And as a result, the entire community is probably in the 100-year floodplain. You're going to buy a house, you're going to get a mortgage, you're going to be required to get flood insurance. So not only is Allison devastated by this news, the whole community of Grafton is now struggling with this increase in flood insurance. In the community of Valley City, a home has flood insurance bill that just went from $700 to more than $10,000 a year. Think about that. A lot of people who hear that amount would say, is that your mortgage payment? No, they say it's flood insurance, and get this, that flood insurance is for $60,000 worth of coverage. You know, we have a opportunity here to, I think, act as a body that actually listens to the challenges of the American people and actually reforms and looks back when we make decisions like Biggert-Waters, and as Senator Menendez has so often said, the concerns about affordability were raised at the time. They assumed those would be taken into consideration as they move forward with the rate reductions, and as a result, did not happen, and these rates went up. But we also have a unique issue in North Dakota. It's called the basement exemption. You know, when you think about at what level your house is protected to, you think about your foundation, you know, to that level where your yard basically meets your foundation. Because we waterproofed our basements along the Red River Valley and a lot of our communities, we were given an exemption. Lots of money went into waterproofing and making those basements flood-proof. Now, you might ask, why do you need a basement? Just put it on slab. North Dakota, unbeknownst to a lot of people, suffers from tornadoes. In fact, Fargo was devastated in the 50s by a tornado, and so people take very seriously that emergency shelter that's provided in basements, and frequently those basements get rehabbed, and as a result, you know, were used as flood control back when those homes were built. But now we have a basement exemption. People have made the investment. FEMA has, in fact, suggested that the basement exemptions will no longer be valid for all of those communities that have relied on that to provide affordable housing in their communities. And so this bill retains and says clearly that the basement exemption, after people made investments and reliance on the government, on the reliance on the government's word, that we will, in fact, have protection. Without this provision, without the basement exemption, flood insurance rates in these areas that rely on basements could go up again $10,000 a year. The Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act provides a balanced, targeted approach. This bill gives FEMA the authority needed to implement reforms included in the Biggert Waters in a thoughtful way to improve the program's solvency and phase out certain subsidies without pricing people out of their homes and out of the program. It delays the premium increases until FEMA completes that all-important affordability study required under Biggert Waters and proposes regulations to implement that allow time for Congress to review. There have been some positive steps since many of my colleagues have come to the floor, including me, to sound the alarm so many months ago. But we need still to pass this bill. And so I think the time is now. And what better way for us to respond to the call of looking at and improving the condition of the middle class than to say we heard, we listened, we understood the challenges, and today we acted. We heard that you want to own your home, and we heard that the federal government ought not get in the way of you owning your home. And so I would encourage all of my colleagues to send a message. Send a message that we are putting our votes where our mouths are, that we are, in fact, today voting to improve the condition of very many working-class and middle-class American citizens who have had great uncertainty created as a result of flood insurance. Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.